Well, hey there, friendships. It's been a minute. Actually, according to YouTube, it's been almost 5 months, which is less of a short break and more of an Odysseus-length disappearance. I basically went on my own little Odyssey, minus the giant Cyclops. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Curtis, and this is Curtis's Corner, where we talk movies, TV, horror, entertainment, and occasionally I disappear for so long you start wondering if I got trapped on Calypso's island. Now, to everyone who's been subscribed this whole time, thank you for not holding a funeral. I know every single time that I upload after vanishing, I say, I'm back. Reviews are going to be consistent this time, and then life immediately looks at me and goes, that's adorable. Cue another 4 months of silence. I swear, I'm becoming the Christopher Nolan of upload schedules. Time works differently around here. Now, the biggest reason I've been gone honestly comes down to life. Work has been absolutely exhausting. Waking up before the sun every day has been slowly turning me into one of those zombies from The Last of Us. Movies also decided to stop playing anywhere remotely close to me because apparently every theater collectively said, let's make Curtis drive halfway across Greece just to watch a movie. And then money. Movie tickets aren't exactly cheap anymore. Going to IMAX nowadays feels less like buying a ticket and more like applying for a mortgage. But honestly, the biggest thing taking up my time has been something I've been incredibly excited about. If you didn't know, I started a brand new podcast called Socially Unwell with my friend Billy. Now, we have already got 7 episodes available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Episode 7 literally just came out on Friday. It's basically 2 sarcastic gay best friends complaining about dating, friendships, work, people in public acting absolutely feral, and all the wonderfully confusing decisions humanity continues to make every single day. So if you've ever watched one of my reviews and thought, I wish he had someone equally chaotic to bounce off of, that is exactly what this podcast is. I will leave links down below because I'm genuinely really proud of what we have been building over there. Now, but also, elephant in the room, yes, I did get fangs. Enjoy. Now, speaking of long journeys, Christopher Nolan apparently looked at Homer's The Odyssey and thought, you know what this needs? About 47 practical effects, existential dread, and a runtime long enough for Odysseus to almost get home twice. Today, we are talking about The Odyssey. Now, I know I'm late. The movie's already been out for about a week, and before somebody beats me to the comments, yes, I know, again, podcast. Between filming that, editing it, working full-time, although I'm off for the summer, trying to remember what free time actually looked like, and occasionally sleeping because apparently that's considered healthy, this review took a little longer than I wanted. Honestly, after finally seeing it, especially in IMAX, I had a lot to say. So, if you enjoy movie reviews with absolutely zero studio bias, plenty of sarcasm, terrible Greek puns, and someone who probably spent way too much time thinking about whether Troy needed a better HR department, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe if you're new. Ring the notification bell so YouTube can maybe notify you before my next 5-month vacation. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, consider joining my Patreon. It really does help me keep making reviews like this and maybe afford another IMAX ticket before they start asking for my firstborn. All right, let's stop circling Ithaca and actually begin this Odyssey. So let's start with the thing that impressed me almost immediately. Christopher Nolan's vision for this movie is absolutely incredible. Whether you're already familiar with Homer's The Odyssey or you've never touched Greek mythology outside of accidentally failing a mythology question in high school, this movie somehow manages to make this ancient world feel enormous, mysterious, and honestly pretty terrifying. Every island feels different. Every destination feels like another level in some massive survival game where Odysseus just keeps rolling the world's worst luck imaginable. It's basically 20 years of congratulations, you survived, and then Poseidon immediately logs back online. I loved how Nolan never made the world feel comfortable. Even the quieter moments have this tension underneath them because you genuinely don't know what could be waiting around the next cliff, inside the next cave, or floating in the literal ocean. Considering Christopher Nolan's track record, none of this really surprised me, but it did absolutely impress me. He is one of those directors where you walk into the theater already expecting something visually ambitious, and somehow he still manages to overachieve. It's honestly getting a little annoying at this point. Some directors are happy if the lighting matches between shots. Nolan is over here asking, what if we built ancient Greece? That ambition is exactly why I think this movie absolutely deserves to be seen in IMAX. Normally, when people tell you you have to see this in IMAX, it's usually code for the movie's fine, but the screen is big. Here, I actually agree. The sheer scale of everything is unbelievable. The oceans seem endless. The cliffs tower over the characters. The cities feel alive. Even moments where people are simply sailing across open water somehow feel massive, because Nolan understands something that a lot of filmmakers don't. Sometimes size is the spectacle. You aren't constantly bombarded with explosions or giant CGI armies every 5 minutes. Instead, you're reminded just how small these people are compared to the world that they are trying to survive. Watching it on a regular screen would still be enjoyable, but IMAX genuinely adds another layer to the experience. You really get a sense of just how isolated everyone is. And then there are the visuals themselves. This movie is absolutely gorgeous. The landscapes are stunning. The practical sets feel lived in. The creatures are intimidating without ever looking cartoonish. The Cyclops was exactly the kind of nightmare fuel that I wanted. The whirlpool sequence looked fantastic, and there was one scene involving pigs. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything because discovering it for yourself is half of the fun, but afterwards I found out that that sequence was achieved almost entirely through practical filmmaking, which absolutely blew my mind. Learning that made me appreciate the craftsmanship even more, because nowadays, whenever something looks impossible, my brain just assumes computer did it. Meanwhile, Nolan apparently looked at the production team and said, no, we're going to traumatize everyone on set instead. That is filmmaking. Now, let's talk about Odysseus. Matt Damon was fantastic. I've always liked Matt Damon, but I think this is one of my favorite performances from him in years. He balances the intelligence of Odysseus with the physical exhaustion that comes from a man who's been surviving impossible situations for what feels like forever. You can tell when he's thinking, you can tell when he's bluffing, you can tell when he's terrified, even though he refuses to show anyone around him. It would have been really easy to make Odysseus feel like this unstoppable action hero, but instead, Damon gives him just enough vulnerability that every victory actually feels earned. He gets beaten down, he loses people, he makes mistakes, he adapts, and that is exactly who Odysseus should be. He is not the strongest man in Greece, he's the smartest. That's a much harder balance to pull off than people might think. The action throughout the movie also deserves a lot of praise. The choreography is excellent. The sword fights have weight behind them. The practical effects help sell every impact. Nothing feels overly polished or weightless. When people get hit, it looks like it hurts. When armies clash, it feels chaotic without becoming visually confusing. There were multiple moments where I found myself just appreciating how well staged everything was. Now, that doesn't mean everything was perfect. There were a handful of fight scenes where I couldn't help noticing background extras doing the classic move thing where they sort of politely wait for their turn. One guy's fighting for his life while another enemy is standing 3 feet away like he's waiting for player 1 to finish their combo. It started feeling less like ancient Greece and more like a Mortal Kombat story mode. It's never enough to ruin the action, and honestly most people probably won't even notice it, but once I spotted it, I couldn't unsee it. And unfortunately, that wasn't the only tiny crack in the otherwise incredible first impression. But a movie like this doesn't work if you don't care about the people making this journey. Thankfully, most of this cast absolutely delivers. Anne Hathaway as Penelope was probably one of the biggest surprises for me. Now, obviously, Penelope isn't swinging swords every 5 minutes or fighting Cyclops, but somehow she ends up carrying just as much emotional weight as Odysseus himself. Because while Odysseus is out there surviving monsters and angry gods, Penelope is essentially trapped inside her own prison back home. She's constantly surrounded by people trying to manipulate her, pressure her, take advantage of her, and convince her that Odysseus isn't coming back. Anne Hathaway portrays that exhaustion beautifully. You can feel years of loneliness, years of frustration, years of hope slowly fading away. And despite all of that, there's still this quiet strength underneath everything that she does. She's not loud, she's not over dramatic, she just feels tired. And honestly, fair. If my husband disappeared for 20 years, I'd probably redecorate the house, change the locks, and tell Poseidon to file a missing persons report. She does such a good job making you root for her that by the time the third or fourth person starts trying to manipulate her, you're just sitting there thinking, can someone please let this woman have just one decent Tuesday? Now, that said, I do think the movie slightly lets Penelope down. The emotion she's carrying becomes one of the driving forces of the story, but I kept expecting her to finally push back harder against everything happening around her. Instead, she's kind of cornered for a large portion of the movie, and while that absolutely works dramatically, I was waiting for this massive payoff where she finally unleashes years of bottled up anger. When that payoff finally arrives, it felt just a little rushed. It wasn't bad, I just wanted more. Now, speaking of people struggling to prove themselves, Tom Holland as Telemachus. Another performance that I genuinely enjoyed. I really liked the internal conflict they gave him. He's caught between wanting to become the man everyone expects him to be and constantly feeling like he isn't enough. Living in the shadow of arguably the greatest Greek hero ever is probably not great for your self-esteem. Tom Holland sells that insecurity really well. He brings enough vulnerability that you understand why Telemachus hesitates. He's still a teenager. He's trying to protect his mother. He's trying to protect Ithaca. He's trying to become someone worthy of his father's legacy. That is compelling. Unfortunately, the movie also made him look way more helpless than I thought it should have. I understand that he's only around 16 or 17. I wasn't expecting him to be suddenly turning into John Wick wearing sandals. But there were multiple scenes where he just gets shoved around, thrown to the ground, overpowered again and again and again. Eventually, I started wondering if his main combat strategy was just becoming part of the floor. Considering he's grown up knowing Ithaca, he's trained, he's been preparing for this possibility his entire life. He should be smarter in combat than what we see. Not necessarily stronger, smarter. It started making him feel less believable than I think the filmmakers intended. And then there's Robert Pattinson. This man has become one of my favorite actors working today because every single role feels completely different. As Antinous, he's just such a slimy little weasel. Every time he walks into a room, he somehow lowers the property's value. He's arrogant, manipulative, cowardly, smug. Basically, the human version of replying per my last email. Pattinson does a fantastic job constantly hiding Antinous's true intentions behind fake charm. You understand exactly why some people follow him, but you also desperately want someone to punch him in the face, preferably several times. My only complaint is that the movie accidentally proves he's kind of pathetic. For someone who constantly talks like he's the biggest threat in Greece, he spends an awful lot of time standing behind other people while they fight. By the end, I wanted somebody to look him dead in the eyes and ask, so are you doing literally anything today? Outside of the main cast, I honestly thought the supporting performances were incredibly strong. John Leguizamo as Eumaeus ended up being one of my favorite surprises. He brought warmth, humor, and a surprising amount of emotion to a character that could have easily just existed as comic relief. His relationship with the family and even the animals added a layer of humanity that I was not expecting. Benny Safdie made Agamemnon feel like someone I'd actually want to learn more about. John Bernthal's Menelaus ended up having way more depth than I initially expected. Charlize Theron brought this really unsettling mystery to Calypso. Zendaya gave Athena a graceful presence that always felt calming whenever she appeared. Elliot Page's Sinon quietly becomes one of the catalysts that gets this entire story moving. Ryan Hurst worked perfectly as Mentor. Corey Hawkins was a solid antagonist alongside Antinous. And even Mia Goth, despite not getting a ton to work with, brought something interesting whenever she was on screen. Which actually leads into one of my biggest disappointments. I wanted more of almost all of them. The cast is stacked. But So many of these characters feel like they're introduced, hint at fascinating backstories, and then the movie sails away before you really get to explore them. Agamemnon is teased as this legendary leader. Menelaus hints that there's so much more beneath the surface. Helen is literally the princess of Troy. The princess of Troy, and she's barely in the movie. Athena should feel like this constant guiding force. Doesn't. Calypso has incredible mythology surrounding her, never shown. Melantho had the potential to become someone I either loved or absolutely hated. Instead, she mostly just existed. It's almost like Christopher Nolan had an all-you-can-eat buffet of Greek mythology and only let us sample half of the menu. Which brings me to probably my biggest issue with the first half of this story. For a movie that's built upon one of history's most famous wars, I honestly expected more Troy. Not necessarily another entire movie, but more of a lead-up, more context, more time understanding what everyone had just survived before the journey home even began. The Trojan War is basically the reason every terrible thing in this movie happens. It's the domino that knocks everything else over, and yet sometimes it feels more like a required reading than something the movie fully embraces. That missing context doesn't ruin the story, not even close. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if we'd spent just a little more time in Troy, everything that follows would have hit even harder. Now, one thing I also have to give this movie a lot of credit for is how it handles its visual effects. Now, if you've watched Christopher Nolan movies before, you already know the man treats CGI like it's that one coworker he technically has to work with, but would really rather avoid. Most of the visual effects here looked fantastic. The Cyclops looked intimidating. That was forced perspective as well. The whirlpool sequence was incredible. The scale of everything always felt believable. But the thing that completely shocked me wasn't actually CGI, it was that pig sequence mentioned earlier. Again, don't worry, I'm not spoiling anything. After the movie, I started looking into how certain scenes were filmed, and learning that the sequence was done almost entirely with practical effects absolutely blew my mind. That's the kind of filmmaking that makes me appreciate movies even more. It's one thing to watch something and think, that looked cool. It's another thing entirely to find out a bunch of incredibly talented people somehow figured out how to pull that off practically. Christopher Nolan is basically allergic to the phrase, "we'll fix it in post." He's the kind of director who would probably look at Mount Olympus and ask if they could build a real one instead. That being said, there was one CGI creature during a mountain attack that looked just a little unfinished to me. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't laughably bad, it just stood out because literally everything else around it looked so convincing. It almost feels unfair criticizing it because the rest of the movie sets such a ridiculously high standard that even one weaker effect immediately catches your eye. Thankfully, the scene moves on quickly enough that it never became distracting. Beyond all the spectacle though, what really surprised me was how emotional this movie ended up being. I expected incredible visuals. I expected fantastic action. And I expected Christopher Nolan to somehow make ancient Greece feel like the coolest place on Earth. What I wasn't expecting was how attached I became to these characters. There are several genuinely heartfelt moments throughout this movie. There are scenes that make you smile, scenes that make you angry, scenes that just quietly sit with the characters and let them breathe. And then there are moments involving animals. That's all I'm saying. Christopher Nolan looked at animal lovers and basically said, "I have a challenge for you." There were multiple moments where I genuinely found myself feeling angry at certain characters because of the choices that they were making. Not because the writing was bad, because the writing was good enough that I cared. That is always a sign of a movie that's doing something right. Then we finally reach the climax. Without spoiling anything, the final battle is incredibly well shot. The choreography is excellent. The practical effects continue to impress. The emotion behind every swing of a sword feels earned because you've spent the entire movie understanding exactly what is at stake. It never feels like action for the sake of action. Every decision, every confrontation, every victory, every loss has emotional weight behind it. Now, I do have one issue with how everything wraps up. I found the build-up to Odysseus' final confrontation slightly underwhelming. Not because the action itself wasn't good, it absolutely was, but because I felt like the emotional payoff arrived just a little too quickly. The movie spends so much time carefully building this long journey that I expected the ending to simmer for just a bit longer before everything exploded. My last remaining criticism is honestly more of a nitpick than anything else. This movie is long. I wasn't bored. Not once was I bored with this. But I do think there are a handful of scenes that probably could have been tightened just a little bit. Maybe shave a few minutes here, a conversation there. Nothing major. Shave some of it off just to be able to add on some Troy stuff or add on to that final battle to let it all breathe. Ironically, a movie about finally getting home could have just found the destination a tiny bit sooner. But even with those criticisms, I genuinely loved this film. Christopher Nolan once again proves why he is one of the best directors working today. The performances are fantastic. The visuals are breathtaking. The practical effects are incredible. The action feels grounded. The emotional moments hit. And even though I would have liked more Troy, more mythology, and a little more breathing room in the ending, none of those issues were enough to outweigh everything that this movie does exceptionally well. So, for me, with all of that being said, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey earns a solid A. This is absolutely one of my favorite movies of the year, and if you're even remotely interested in mythology, go and see it. If you are a Christopher Nolan fan, go see it. If you've never experienced IMAX before, honestly, this might be the movie that convinces you why people keep recommending it. Because this isn't just a movie about getting home. It's about perseverance, family, identity, hope, and proving that no matter how impossible the journey feels, eventually you can find your way back to Ithaca, unless Poseidon has your location turned on. So those are my thoughts on The Odyssey. If you've already seen the movie, let me know down in the comments what you thought. Did you love it as much as I did? Did you have some of the same criticisms? Or are you currently writing me a 12-page scroll explaining why I'm wrong? If so, at least stay committed to the theme. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to leave a like. It really does help the channel get pushed out to more people. Subscribe if you're new, because despite my absolutely legendary disappearing acts, there are plenty more movie reviews on the way. If you're missing me between uploads, don't forget to check out my podcast, Socially Unwell, with my friend Billy. We've got 7 episodes out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Links for that are all down below. And if you'd like to support everything I do on here, whether it's movie reviews, podcast content, or helping me afford increasingly expensive IMAX tickets that are apparently now requiring a small business loan, you can also check out my Patreon. Literally only $2. Every single bit of support genuinely helps keep the channel going, and I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who has been watching, commenting, and sticking around, even when I accidentally vanish for months at a time. You guys really are the reason why I keep coming back. I have been Curtis. This has been My Corner. I'll see you on the next one. Bye, friendships.